Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends podcast. The podcast is on help you feel, see, and think differently about the podiatry profession. Today, I'm digging into the archives, and I'm pulling out an episode from the 28th of February 2020. Yes, that is 6 years ago. It's episode 64, and it's with a really good friend of mine, Dr. Dave Weiman, who is a psychologist in Pennsylvania. And the episode was called Purpose, Values, and Best Self. Now, the reason I'm dragging this out of the archives is because it's that good. And I know a lot of people who have only recently found this podcast in, say, the last year or so, are maybe going back 50 episodes, sometimes 100 episodes, but they're not going all the way back. And I think this episode is too good to be missed. When it was originally released, it went gangbusters. So I know since then there's been a lot of people who have found the podcast, and I don't want this one to be overlooked. As you're listening to this, there may be a few things that we say or we talk about that may seem a little bit dated because we might be talking about something that's coming up or something that's just happened in the past. But the overall content of this episode is bloody brilliant. So I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with Dr. Dave Weiman. My guest today is Dr. Dave Weiman. He's a psychologist and leadership consultant in Philadelphia. He helps business leaders of all types, including those who run medical practices, podiatry practices, with finding the best talent, strengthening their teams, and improving their overall leadership. So, Dr. Dave, how are you doing today?
Awesome. And it's great to be with you again.
I'm looking forward to this because I have shared some of your Rise and Wine videos on the Podiatry Legends page and also on my personal page. I look forward to those videos.
Oh, thank you so much.
The tips are always just practical. How do you find the ideas for those videos?
It's often, we have a kind of a project management software that allows us to have what's called a board for projects. It's almost like a whiteboard. So Rise and Wine is its own board. And as I think of ideas, or my special projects coordinator, Lauren, who's involved with our social media marketing, has ideas, we kind of pop them in there. And we also use a method to make sure that we're not repeating the same type of story.
Yeah.
So we have a list of frameworks that comes out of the Business Black Ops, which we're both connected to. Something Dave Fries had presented at the last Business Black Ops meeting was this sort of Swiss Army knife concept around marketing. But we do have a strategy for why we're talking about what we're doing, what we're talking about, and the framework for it. The framework might be a wise old owl. That's somebody that I knew from the past who is an old mentor of mine. It could be a quotation. It could be something I read in a book or saw in a movie. And we try to rotate through those frameworks so that it doesn't become boring for the people who are watching those videos. But thank you so much for your feedback.
No, I do. I really enjoy them because they only go for a couple of minutes. And every time I watch one, I walk away from it going, geez, that was wise. You know, just wise words or something you can apply to that particular day.
We're definitely trying to get one level below the obvious when we're talking about a psychology concept, because otherwise it's, you can see that anywhere, but it's trying to give an insight into why something is the case.
Yeah. And the other reason I wanted to get you on was I had a couple of emails and I had somebody contact me and say, oh, is there any chance you're going to be running any like communication workshops down the track? And I said, well, yes, I am. And they said, are you going to be introducing much psychology? And I went, well, I'm not a psychologist, so I can mention concepts, but I can't actually offer any insight. And as soon as he said that, I went, but I know the psychologist that if I was ever going to get one on the show, who I was going to get on, and that was you. Because you've had a lot of contact with podiatrists over your career.
Indeed. And, this goes back a long way. I was when I use the term football for the story, I'm referring to American football, but I was a football player in high school, and I was a kicker. And I had a toe issue that was making it extremely painful to have contact with the ball when I was kicking field goals, extra points, and I was also a punter. And there was a podiatrist down the street who was always a great neighbor. He was just somebody who was friendly. He had kids who were my age and the age of some of my siblings. And I thought, man, this really hurt the night before a game. And I didn't know what to do. And we called Dr. Schachterly. And he said, come on over. And he had an office attached to his house. And he did something with the nail and then embedded a little pad next to this part of my nail that he cut away,
Yeah.
to pad it. And he explained to me what he was doing and why. And there was something very reassuring about his approach to this. He was a well experienced podiatrist. And what he did was exactly the right technique for what I had. But when I left, all of that, first of all, the pain was gone. And I mean, the pain was such that when I was kicking, it felt like it was radiating up my leg. It wasn't really, but I was like, I was nervous about putting full force into the ball. He got it. He totally understood what was needed in order to, uh, improve that situation. And that was the first time that I had ever gone to see a podiatrist. And I have had the experience since then of seeing podiatrists for other reasons. But he just stood out in my mind as someone who was an excellent practitioner of the craft, but also knew how to deal with people
Yeah.
and how to get me relaxed so he could do what he needed to do. As I look back on it, I think that was a model for how all medical professionals could practice. And when you have that as an example, when you see somebody who isn't quite that skilled in handling the person and the issue, you can tell. And I'm reminded of this quotation. I think it's from Lewis Thomas. I'm not sure who wrote a lot about medical topics and wrote the book The Youngest Science. But I think he wrote, "It's more important to know what kind of person has a disease than what kind of disease has a person." And with regard to our feet, it's inescapable when you have foot pain. There's nothing you can't stand up, you can't go from place to place.
That's true.
And as an athlete, where that was part of how I did my job, I hope to think I did it at a pretty high level. I was a walk-on at Temple University as a kicker for their football team. Unfortunately, I limped off. But those little things, as a trainer that I know talks about how the feet are the foundation of the whole body. And he's not a podiatrist, but he gets the importance of having healthy feet and ankles, and that's where it all starts. So
Yeah, so we have a mutual friend, Dr. Peter Wishney, who's also been on this podcast, and I remember him saying when he was on the podcast, his podiatry practice, their thinking is they're giving people their life back.
right.
And that's what we do as podiatrists. If somebody is in pain and they can't exercise and they're putting weight on and the dog's getting fat, when we get them out of pain, we are actually adding years to their life and we're giving them their life back. And I think that's something that we always need to remember. That's what we're doing. We're not just treating foot problems. We're treating people.
I had tendonitis in my left foot as a result of taking a cholesterol medication a few years ago. And the podiatrist I normally see was out of town. And so I saw someone who I could at least find some good recommendations for. And it was awful. And when I got done and I got home and I had the boot, I didn't understand exactly what I was supposed to do. And I called Dr. Peter Wishney.
Yeah.
And just the way that he broke things down and explained them to me is an example of the way that you practice is marketing all by itself. For folks who don't know, I mean, I'm in Philadelphia, Peter's in New Jersey. I would probably drive to go see him the next time,
Yeah.
because that's how much trust I have, and not just his technical knowledge, because I can't judge that, right? All I can judge is my comfort with him, which leads to the trust. And Harry Beckwith, the great service marketing author, talks about that a lot. But that's really where the action is. So fortunately, one of my very first experiences with a podiatrist was also setting the stage for me to understand how do you practice service delivery in an effective way, because that's part of the marketing also.
I think that's a really important point with the communication and how you practice or how we practice as podiatrists is part of our marketing.
Exactly.
And you'll have podiatrists say, "Oh no, I'm not into that evil marketing type thing," and you sort of going, just
Yes,
by
you are.
that comment alone is just, we're all marketing. Yeah, from the time you wake up in the morning, you put your shirt on, you walk into your office, you are marketing yourself. But I have seen some of those podiatrists who go, yeah, you know what, you're right, you're not marketing.
And that has an impact on the staff as well, because they're watching the owner of the practice for their cues as to how to treat people. And if it's not good at the top, it's unlikely to be good throughout that group.
Is that what you mean? So sometimes you can walk into a medical office, and I usually joke around saying, and the receptionist that greets you looks like they've been weaned on vinegar, and they peer over the top with their glasses, and they go, "Doctor will be with you soon," and you go, "Oh, okay," and you take a seat, and then the doctor comes out. His communication skills are poor. The nurse is poor.
That's right.
You walk out of there going, I just feel like I've been violated. So it all starts from the owner of the business, and it works its way down to the attitude.
Well, the example that I gave you of the person that I had to see in this urgent situation, it was complete chaos from the time I walked in until the time I left. So it's no accident that when I left, I realized the podiatrist hadn't told me how to properly use the piece of equipment that I bought.
Yeah.
And it was Peter who did it. I may have sent Peter a box of brownies after that because he deserved them.
And he would have eaten them too.
Yes. I'm not certain about that, by the way, so don't check up on me. But
I asked you, is there any particular topic you feel would be really, really important for us to discuss as podiatrists and help us enjoy our work a little bit more? And you mentioned something about motivational speakers and success gurus, and they're saying everything is about your passion and drive. And it all sounds good, but is that everything? Do we always need to have passion? And if we don't have passion, does that mean we fall off the wagon and life is terrible? Can you explain this a little bit more?
well, I was at a business chamber of commerce meeting, and there was somebody there who was sharing what she did for a living, and she said, "I'm a wedding photographer." And people said, "Oh, how long have you been doing that?" And she gave some short period of time. I don't recall exactly, but maybe it was, like 1 or 2 years. They said, how's it going?" She said, it's really bad. I said, well, they asked her about her experience. She didn't really have much experience as a wedding photographer professionally, uh, but she had attended a motivational speech. And the person said, "If you don't like your job, you should get out of there and you should just quit. You should start something new." And so she did. The problem is she didn't know what she was doing when she got into it. It was something that she thought she'd like. She left a full-time, paying job to get into this. And I think that sometimes people hear the clarion call of the motivational speaker, particularly when they start talking about passion, because they know that statistically, the majority of people in jobs aren't necessarily passionate or thrilled with it. But that doesn't mean that they should jettison from that and pursue just what they're passionate about. And you also hear some of these phrases like, when you love your job, it feels like you're on vacation every day, or you never feel like you're working. And so I think some of these stories and yarns and tales that motivational speakers and success gurus spout can be very attractive to people. And they think, well, I have to be passionate about it, and I have to love what I do every day. And Tyson, I agree with that. You know that I love what I do every day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
But
very
I
aware
think
of
that in the course of a career, particularly in podiatry and the podiatrists that you and I both know and have heard year after year talking about their practices, it's not like every day is sunshine and roses
No.
and violin music.
No.
And I think that your guest last week, the podcast that dropped January 28th.
Yeah, that was
Tuesday, January
episode
28th.
59 with Louise Irini.
She gave such a, and if somebody's listening to this and they haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it. You will, and because one of the things that I noticed was the tone of Louise's voice as she was talking about her journey through her podiatry practice and her journey through life. There were specific times when she got excited. If you recall, she started talking about tap dancing.
Yeah.
And she started talking about other things even within the practice of podiatry that I think are very common. One of those is people are drawn to it for all sorts of reasons, but you can hit a point in your career where you feel like you're providing a service you're not necessarily thrilled to provide. You might not necessarily getting paid enormously for it, so you have to do a lot of those things in order to make a living. And I think it is normal to kind of hit these plateaus. She did not close her practice. She did not decide she wasn't going to do this anymore. She didn't walk away from it, but she found a way to restructure that practice that made it a joy again to do. And so I do believe sometimes that, look, there's some sappy things that I find motivational, but when it comes to passion, and that word in particular, I just think people, it's important to be thoughtful about this and to find, of course, ways to find the passion in life, no matter what we're doing, whether it's in our personal life, like the tap dancing example
Yeah.
that she gave, or the work. But you said something really interesting in that same podcast. You mentioned that you were talking about marketing with Louise, and I don't want to get us off track, although when you and
Yeah.
I start talking, anything's
I
possible.
know.
But
I know.
you were both talking about marketing and that there's some people for whom it seems easy.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
you made an awesome point. You said the only reason it looks easy, I wrote it down, the only reason it looks easy for me is because I love doing it. How awesome is that? And I remember, and again, if people listen to that podcast after listening to this one, Tyson slows down a little bit. If you go back, he sort of pauses right before he says the word. You said, the only reason it looks easy for me is because I love doing it. And you really got into that word. And so listening to the tone of your voice and Louise's as you were talking about different pathways through a podiatry career,
Yeah.
through different practices and through different aspects of it, that was such a rich example of what we're talking about today. But now we're unpacking the psychology of it. But I thought that was a really great example.
Which is why, and if people miss that episode, it is episode 59, and off the top of my head, I think it was titled "Podiatry was boring my ass off," and that was what was really funny about that particular episode. That was the fastest episode to go to 300 downloads. It did it like in 24 hours. It went to 400 really quick. It went to 500. It just
That's awesome.
Because people saw that title and went, yeah, podiatry is boring my ass off. Is there some insight there? And that's why I think this is perfect timing getting you on to talk about this, because it does. What Louise was talking about and what we're going to talk about, I think, fit really well together. They're like bookends.
And how many people go through that?
Oh, yes.
How many podiatrists go through that where they get to this, it becomes this routine. It's like, I can't do that anymore, and that's when hitting that point, you're either going to push through it and you're going to find that joy and passion again, or I don't know what happens. You don't want to go through the rest of your career that way, just being miserable. But
so if people lose it, say they've been in the career where it might happen after 2 years, and I must admit, I found myself 2 years into my podiatry career, I was bored. And fortunately and unfortunately, I ended up with a hand problem and I couldn't work for 2 years.
Right.
So having that 2 year break, I was quite eager to get back into it. And then because of that hand injury, it then this sounds funny, it forced my hand to change the way I approached my practice, because I couldn't rely that my hand would work from 1 week to the next.
Right.
So I had to set things up. I had to make sure I had other people employed. I had to have systems in place so it could look after the practice while I wasn't actually there, which then made podiatry fun. And that's how that's what kicked me off into the marketing and the business side of things. And and it sort of just grew from there. So if people, they lose their passion, I think it's gone, what do they do?
I believe that we find the seeds of it in some very basic areas. And I would say there's three. There's our purpose in life, there's the values that we have, and there's who we are when we are our best selves, when we show up and we feel phenomenal. And to reverse engineer this a little bit, the jaded podiatrists, or not, I'm sorry, I don't want to say jaded podiatrists, but the podiatrists that I've heard talk about the part of their career that's where you were after 2 years.
Yeah.
They have traveled pretty far away from the purpose, the values, and the best self. And I don't think it happens overnight. I think it just starts to occur as we try. Sometimes it happens in a period of stagnation within a practice itself, could be any professional practice, where you find yourself kind of going through the motions. And that can be because you're overworked. And I think that happens to a lot of folks. They get into a situation where there's something about the practice that's working for them. And again, it could be a podiatry practice or even a law practice or any type of practice. And it's not like Tuesday it was awesome and Wednesday it's horrible.
Yeah.
I think it kind of happens over time. And so one of the things I think that could be helpful for getting back to that is I often ask professionals, tell me why you got into this field in the first place. And you see them lean back, they think a little bit, and they start telling you things about purpose. Here's why I did it, because my dad was a doctor and I always wanted to do this. He was the town doctor for podiatry or whatever it was. And I saw how people looked up to him and I saw how many people that he helped. Or whatever it is. But if we can get them back into the frame of mind they were when they were originally found fulfillment of that purpose, that's one pathway back to that original passion that they had. The reason why I mention values is that.
Well, before you move on to values, if we go back one step to the passion that we were just talking about. What happens if somebody going, I don't know what my passion is though. I don't know. I just did podiatry because it was there. It seemed to be a better choice than being an optometrist. So they did it because they wanted to do something in the health field. And they go, I wanted to help people. But mate, is that enough? Is that enough passion to be doing what they're doing?
It may not be. And yet, we have sort of two philosophies we can have in life. The things happen by accident or not.
Yeah.
So, and maybe we don't have to think in such a bifurcated way, or maybe it's not that clear a dichotomy. But if the person always wanted to help people, and they found that doing that through podiatry fulfilled that purpose, that's one thing. If they just wanted to wear a lab coat, a white lab coat, and it was like, should I do podiatry or optometry? Like which of those? I just want the initials after my name. Then I'm not sure that they're doing themselves any favors or their clients, their patients, by continuing to do it, right? I mean, there's people who go to law school and then don't practice law. And maybe there's people who get into different professions who don't belong there. So I imagine that if somebody did it and it was like, well, as you put it, should I do it this way or should I do it that way? But they're not super passionate about it. Then there isn't a passion to go back to, right? If they were never passionate about it at all. But I have had people say to me, I don't know what I'm passionate about. And what I have found is if you look at the things that they enjoy doing, that's what they're passionate about. They're just saying, I don't do that for a living. So one person that I spoke with, just talking about his hobbies and what he likes to do in his spare time. He does these ultra long bike races. And it takes such concentration and focus. And it's mental. He said it's not necessarily physical. There's a lot of really fit people who can't compete in these ultra long bike races, but he can. There is something about testing himself, about challenging himself, about breaking through obstacles, about getting to the point where he wants to stop, but he keeps going, that he's totally passionate about. But if you said to him, is that something you're passionate about? He is trying to think about that in terms of work. And he would say, but I'm not experiencing that at work. And so is a fulfilled life only fulfilled by what we're doing at work? I feel that I don't believe very much about what Freud said, but Freud had said the tasks of healthy adulthood are to work and to love. And it's really important. So if you're miserable as a podiatrist and you have passions outside of work, you'll be okay, but you're not going to have a fully fulfilled life, right? Just hearing you talk about even the marketing piece, and how excited you are about that, and figuring things out. You're a problem solver, I think, at such a core level. The challenge of, I just bought this really expensive piece of equipment. I have to figure out what to do with it. How do I make that money back? Well, somebody can see that as something that's crushing them, or somebody can go, I'm going to figure this out. And that there's a big difference there. So that outlook is really important. But I think that it's different when somebody says, I was passionate about it, and now I don't feel I'm passionate about it anymore, than somebody who says, I don't know what I'm passionate about. And there's different questions that I would use based on how they presented that quandary. They might be at the same place, not feeling super passionate.
Yeah.
But if they never were, I think I would ask different questions than if they said, I used to love it. I used to love being the person who put the key in the door of the office every day. And now I can't stand it. It's just.
Well, it's like that. It's when you set your practice up for the first time. I recall the first practice I had was on the Gold Coast. Opening hours were 8:30, and I think I was there at 6:15, just in case somebody turned up early.
Yep.
But I recall opening that door, and I was probably there till 9 o'clock that night. I didn't want to leave. It was too much fun working for myself. And it was like that for the first period of time. And then it got boring.
Right.
Because I felt like I was doing the same thing every day. And I think sometimes I've seen some podiatrists, and not just podiatrists, other business owners, almost self-sabotage their business just to make it exciting. They just they make some bad decisions.
Sake, right?
Yeah, they make bad decisions. I'm going to change this, and we're going to expand to here, and they don't have the resources to be doing it. But all of a sudden, it makes life exciting. Not exciting for the team, but exciting for them. Well, they think it's exciting,
and that's, to me, that is disconnecting the purpose from just shaking things up, right? Because the purpose is really important. Why are we here? We're here to serve people. Hopefully, we're here to make their lives better and solve these physical problems, this pain that they're having. But there's lots of different ways to fulfill that purpose. With regard to this wrinkle that you just described, where the person shakes things up because they just like change, that's doing that in your professional practice is not really a good idea, because you're not really assessing the person who does that isn't assessing the downside of changing things just to change them. And that what that does to a staff can really be a problem, because there's some people who like change for change's sake and some people who don't. You want stability in a practice. You want people who show up, they know the processes really well. Those things are well learned. They know how to handle people when they come in. It gives a sense of organization to a professional practice when people come in. They see that you can improve things, but to radically change them, to say, well, we're going from this kind of care to just sports medicine for podiatry. We don't know anything about that, but I thought it'd be fun. Those guys who do sports, the podiatry for athletes, it seems to be a great business. That's a really bad reason to change something.
But I remember at one stage there were 5 podiatry clinics, 1,800 kilometres apart. I was travelling between them. I had sort of gone down that franchising path, was helping some other podiatrists set up podiatry businesses. And I'm thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Then one particular night, I was sitting in my motel room, and I was talking to my daughter at the time. She was about 6. And she asked me something. She said, "Daddy, why are you away all the time?" And that just broke my heart.
Yep.
And then I sat back and went, hang on, that's such a good question. Why am I away all the time? I got into podiatry, and you'll remember this, my first business Black Ops event. And Dave Freeze was asking me why I do what I do. Right. And when we dug it down really deep, other than me getting extremely upset, which I feel a little bit right now, but I was doing it because I wanted to provide a better life for my family. And all of a sudden I realised, hang on, I'm not home. So it's sort of going, so all of a sudden I was wondering why I was feeling really uncomfortable and frustrated. It's because why I wanted to do it, I was actually doing the exact opposite. I was away from home so I could spend more time with my family. Didn't make any sense.
Right. And that's where the behavior was unmoored from values and purpose. You value family. Your purpose is very much tied up in creating a phenomenal life for them.
Yeah.
But the solution wasn't fitting the purpose or the values. And it relates to that third piece I talked about also, best self. I've seen you with your wife and your daughter. And, something that struck me, that sort of choked me up, is at a live event that we were attending, they were there and you were walking away, you were smiling, your wife and your daughter were there, and you said, "I'm with my family," and how happy you were. So that's, the passion doesn't have to be, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster every day and I'm just experiencing this thrill. That passion is, I saw that, how important family was to you right in that moment. And that when that is what's at the center of your life, it makes all the other decisions a lot easier. And I wonder how many people listening to this right now also have the feeling that they have wandered down a path that they thought would lead back to their family and provide more for their family, but they're really not. They're spending less and less time because they're pursuing something in a way that's not connected to that value, those values, that purpose, or that best self they could be.
Yeah, and it's also when you do have children, you only have them for a certain period of time. Like Tia is now, she'll be 16 this year. And, and what's good right now is she really, really enjoys spending time with us. As a family, we have a really good laugh. My two older kids are 20, this year going to be 27 and 29. And yeah, they've moved away. They're both down in Sydney. I don't see them very often. I've got a grandchild now, which I'll be lucky if I see once or twice a year.
Right.
So you don't have your kids forever, and if family is really important, I think you've got to get the balance between how much time you're spending at work, how much money do you really need to make, and is family really that important? But I do have another friend who I was talking to them about this, and I said, you seem to be traveling a lot, you seem to be away a lot. How important is your family? And he actually said, not as important as making money. And I went, oh, okay. But if that's his values,
right.
and which leads on to the second thing you were talking about, is a person's values is really important.
Right. And I do think this crosses professions, where people can find that what they've gotten themselves involved with doesn't fulfill the values and doesn't fit that anymore. And it's something interesting. David Fries began talk. Our colleague, I assume folks listening to this may or may not, should know who he is. But
most people listening to this probably would have no idea who Dave Fries is. However, I am going to line Dave up and bring Dave onto the show, which after people listen to Dave, their life will be changed.
It's a colleague of Tyson's and mine, who's just brilliant at many things, and things that enrich and fulfill a life are something that he's almost I call him a curator of these phenomenal ideas.
Yeah.
And we talked a couple years ago about what kind of lifestyle do you want, and where does the profession fit into the lifestyle? Because if you just start with the profession, there's not going to be any room left for your life after that. And you explained that same feeling, and I'm not sure that Louise was explaining it on the last podcast, the episode we've referenced, in quite the same way. But you can get to a point in this field where you're serving people all the time, and podiatry requires a very intense focus. You cannot let your mind wander, or something really bad will happen. The patient will let you know. So that it's got to be exhausting to do that. It's if I'm going to see a general practitioner, we're talking as part of that engagement. They might be trying to figure out something in their head, but then they're going to do an exam, but that's very different than solving a problem that's going on with somebody's foot. That requires a very different kind of focus and a very different kind of attention.
And the other part too, when people come and see a podiatrist, a lot of times we are their last resort. We're trying to change that. Like in the UK, they did this really cool Pods Heals campaign, trying to let people know that when you have heel pain, podiatry should be your first thought, not your last thought. So a lot of the times, by the time patients come to us, they've been to the GP, they've been to the physio, they may have been to the chiropractor, the Chinese therapist, the chemist shop, and then somebody says, have you thought about a podiatrist? So by the time they come to us, sometimes they're not always in the best moods either.
Right. It's a last resort, and they may have lost faith or confidence or hope that there's a solution to it. If you have an abundant lifestyle around and your practice is part of that, then the stress of the practice is going to be met by the resources that you've built up. People tend to overvalue money as a resource. It's a very important resource, but in terms of dealing with stress, when you have a really good family life, when you're happy, when you're taking time off appropriately, and I don't mean vacations, I mean able to separate from the practice, even if it's a few times throughout the day to get a little recovery break in there. When you have friends around you, and all of those things help create this system around the practice that feeds you and supplies you with the energy that you need to do a very difficult job. So if your answer to the stress of working is to work more, this equation will not result in a very happy life. But I do think that when I listen to podiatrists talking about the stresses and strains of the practice, along with the parts that they love, the stresses and strains are often the stress that doesn't get relief somewhere else in their life because they're working so hard. So you have to have that. And I know a number of people who have more than one office.
Yeah.
They're traveling around. Even that is stressful. If there's nothing else in your life that's putting gas back in the tank, then this is not going to work out very long. It just can't.
And is this part of being your best self? This is how you need to work this out to become your best self. So when Louise was talking about, she's right at tap dancing. Is it having something outside of podiatry that gives you enjoyment?
With regard to the best self, it's really when I show up at work and I feel the best, who am I at that moment? And when I ask people, like, what are the things that I bring to the table? Am I able to use my sense of humor? Am I able to use my expertise? Am I able to use my listening skills? For me, that's when I'm my best self. That happens to be who I am at work and who I try to be in my life outside of work. So I will often ask professionals who are feeling not as fulfilled within the practice at that moment, tell me about your best self and tell me what percentage of the time you're feeling that way at work versus the amount of time you feel that way at home. That comes right out of the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Institute's resilience program, which is a stress management program. And that's they do that assessment to really help people see if when you're your best self, you're practicing your craft and you're doing it in a way where you connect with people, you really have time to listen to their problems that they're dealing with as a patient. And then you're delivering your expertise, but you say that I'm only doing that 20% of the time at work, then it doesn't matter what's happening outside of work because we have to deal with that. But with regard to the other aspect of it that you're mentioning, which I think is really important, is am I doing things that make me happy when I'm not at work? And so to that point, I will often ask people who are overstressed in their professional practice, tell me about something you really love to do that you used to do and you don't do it anymore. And they go, whoa, I used to love having breakfast with my kids because they're funny and we would have a good time. I don't do that anymore. I grab a breakfast sandwich somewhere and I eat it in the car on the way to work because I don't have time anymore. They think they don't have time. They do have time. They're not choosing to use it in the best way possible. Or I used to play the guitar. Tell me about that. I used to love playing. I used to go to this little coffee shop near my house and I'd play one night a week when they had open mic. And it was great. You just see the whole expression on their face changes.
Yeah.
They're almost transported into that. And I think that's really critical because we stop, we lose that. We don't lose the ability to play and to have fun. We just stop doing it, don't we? Right?
But what makes people think they don't have time? That person that doesn't have breakfast with the kids anymore because they feel they need to be at the office because I don't have time. In their head, they're going, but I need to be at work at 7:30, so I can't sit there for 15 minutes and have breakfast. Why does that happen, and how can they snap out of it? Is there a tip for that?
Well, they lie. They lie.
They're liars. Oh, bastards! They're lying.
Yeah. I mean, what can happen, unfortunately, is that they hit a wall at some point, or they have a medical issue related to stress where they have to slow down. But that's not what you want to happen in your professional life. As a podiatrist, you don't want to have to go see a heart specialist to have them tell you need to slow down.
Yeah.
So we usually recognize it when we've crowded out the stuff that we really enjoy by working harder. Ultimately, it's a trap. In the book Rest, which another colleague of ours recommended to me 2 years ago, it talks about the most productive people that they ever studied, most productive people in history. Guess what? They weren't workaholics. Some of the most prolific writers write 4 hours a day, usually in the morning. They spend the rest of the day doing whatever, feeding their mind, going and doing and enjoying things, riding a bike, doing some planting in the garden or things like that. So I do think it's a little bit of a lie that we tell ourselves when we don't have the time to do that.
I have mentioned that to people and I said, why don't you take a week off? Oh, no, I couldn't possibly afford the time to take a week off. And I've gone, well, if you have a heart attack, you're going to have a week off. And they
That's
go,
exactly my point.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and they forget that they don't look after their health and it spirals out of control and they end up a heart attack or sick or just something that puts them out for a period
Right.
of time, then it's a forced holiday.
And as a psychologist, I can't change someone's perception that they don't have time.
Yeah.
So sometimes I will start with, what's the minimum effective dose of that fun thing that they're willing to commit the time to? What's the smallest amount that they would spend meditating or taking a walk or playing with the dog or having breakfast with their kids? Because if they view that small, that minimum effective dose, that's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and I can give them that experience of getting some of that back in their lives. You can get some traction there, but it can be a very crusty, hardened over belief that I don't have time. And I do think that that's very difficult to crack that, because there's something they're afraid of. They're afraid if they don't get into the office, they're not going to make the money. They're not going. People in that situation are often living above their means and they're trying to catch up all the time. There's some financial pressure or there's something else going on. It's almost never time, because there's nothing we have more control over in life than where our physical body is at any given time, right? I can move over here. I can over here. I
Yeah,
can
you
I
can
can lean
choose.
back. I can lean forward. That's all totally within my control. So it's like when people who are chronically late and they show up at something late and they say, I can't help it. You know, can't help it. Who was physically stopping you from getting here?
That is
So
so true. And some people are like that. But I remember when one of the things that I used to do every morning, which I really enjoyed when Tia was like 3 or 4, and especially when she was going to school, trying to get her out of bed was really, really hard, really difficult. But so I'd walk into her room, she was like, say, 6, just trying to get her up. And I'd go, do you want to come for a swim? Because she wasn't allowed in the pool by herself. The only time she was allowed in the pool was if there was an adult with her. So we would go for a swim every morning. That one, I'd say, do you want to go for a swim? Without her eyes even opening, the sheets would just get flung off. She would just be putting her swimmers on, or she'd have her swimmers on already that she put them on before she went to bed. And we'd go and swim in the pool for half an hour, and then we'd come out, have breakfast, get ready. She'd go to school, and I'd go to work. That was so enjoyable.
yep,
It was just
that's
so
a great
much fun.
example of that. Yep.
And it took no extra time other than just getting up half an hour earlier and going to bed half an hour earlier.
Right.
So we have control.
And for people who want to get up just half an hour earlier to have the time to do something, I generally tell them, don't set your clock half an hour earlier tomorrow. Tomorrow, set your alarm clock 5 minutes earlier and do that until you're accustomed to it. Then set it 5 minutes earlier than that. Then set it 5 minutes earlier than that. Because there's a concept in psychology called the just noticeable difference. That's the percentage something has to change for you to notice that it changed. If you're lifting weight and you have 100 pounds on a bar and you're doing a chest press, somebody could add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more pounds and you wouldn't notice it. It tends to be a constant and it's usually around 10%. So they would have to add about 10 pounds for you to notice that that bar is heavier. And if we're trying to get people to change, if we're trying to get them to, even if you want something to do something that you're recommending they do as a practice to alleviate some pain or to massage their foot or to do something else, if you can find ways to have them incrementally do it, unless it's medically necessary that they do it exactly the way that you described, it's probably easier to get somebody to do a certain kind of stretch a smaller period of time and more times during the week than to get them to commit to a longer period of time and in the beginning, because I think that change can be difficult for people. That really depends. As the doctor, you're the authority figure. So if you told them, I need you to do this heel stretch or this hamstring or whatever it is, this stretch for, do it 30 times every day, I would still try to break it down for them and have them do it a certain number of times at different times during the day. People can get their head around that a little more.
Yeah, I called it the lazy man's exercise guide.
Mm-hmm.
Because I said
That's awesome.
there's a certain number of exercises that you probably need to do. I said, now, to go and sit in the corner for the next, for 15 or 20 minutes a night and do all this it's probably unlikely you're going to do it. So I
No,
said, I have put together what I call the lazy man's exercise guide.
that's awesome.
But I just give them
Right.
stretch that whenever you see steps, do this. Whenever you're on your phone, whenever you're talking on your mobile phone, you do this exercise. Whenever you're sitting at the table, you do this exercise. So I try to look at what the average person would do in a day and what
Hmm.
exercise could they do while they're doing that, which would not add any extra time to them.
And it's exactly in line with what we're talking about for bringing things back into one's life that they've previously given up in a way where they can start to get a little traction, a little of that enjoyment again. But I am reminded of the joke, how many psychologists does it take? How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
Oh, yes, I
And the
remember
answer
this.
is, yeah, the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change. And as you know, if somebody is chasing just the financial success, and they've said that's like the example that you gave, where the person said, "I don't really care about my family; I care about the money," then they're going to deal with, misery will be their partner instead of a live person because nobody wants to be around somebody like that. They don't have the ability to connect with other people and make them feel good. But in general, I guess where I'm going with this is that it is very difficult to convince someone else that they can have more of this happiness and they can have more in their lives if they choose to. I do think that people tend to hit a wall and then change horses. And that's the example that I gave very early with the wedding photographer.
Yeah,
Instead of trying to deal with what would have made her happier in her life overall, or how to improve that work situation, or maybe find a better company to work for, she threw it all away in response to something a motivational speaker said to her. I mean, it's crazy if you think about it. But you had also mentioned, what if somebody was never super passionate about podiatry to begin with, and now they're finding that it's become routine and they're not happy with it? Um, there are some people who just aren't happy. Uh, you know what I mean? Like, and their peak, the happiest they ever were in life. And this is another question I often ask people. Tell me about the happiest moment that you ever, you can recall. Oftentimes it is something related to family. When I saw my daughter for the first time, my first child, they'll mention that. Or when something else really special happened, their wedding day or their graduation from a doctoral program, they'll mention these things. And if I say to them, tell me who was there, who was around you. Oh, my wife was obviously there. She had the baby. I remember the smell in the room, like there was some disinfectant that they were using. Then I've said to people, tell me about the biggest check you ever got. And what was the amount? And they'll usually get close. Like they'll say, well, I sold my house. I remember at the closing table, they gave me a check for such a certain amount of money. I say, what color was the check? They can't remember. They
yeah,
can remember all these things about things that really mattered to them, who was there in the waiting room when the baby was born, what they did right away, what they smelled in the delivery room, and all the things around them. They can't remember the color of the biggest check they ever got. And the point that I am trying to make when I use that example in seminars is, what really matters then? You know,
yeah.
what really
That's a
matters.
good point. That's a really good point. So, okay, we've talked a lot about your purpose, values, being your best self. I know we're getting to the end of our conversation. What tips and advice would you give somebody? Is there a couple of things that you would say if somebody's listening to us now and they go, "Yeah, I just need that little bit of a pick me up, or I need to make a slight change"? Are there one or two things that everybody should either do now, or just at least keep it in the back of the mind that they may need to do in the future?
One of the things that I feel most strongly about is because I think the seeds of our passions are planted in childhood. So what I would recommend is to go back and think about the things that used to give you the biggest kick when you were a child. When you were a kid, what really made you happy? What did you get excited about? What do you recall having fun doing, even if it was a complete waste of time? Because we're so concerned about saving time and I can't waste any time. Well, but when we were most joyful and playful in life, we didn't think about time that way. We were in the moment. And if you really think about it, sometimes when we're having a blast, it doesn't matter if it was just for 5 minutes. It just felt really good.
Yeah.
So it doesn't require that you spent 5 days in some blissful state. And so I think if they can go back and identify what were the things that you used to, I've done this exercise myself and I found something really interesting. When I love to write as an adult, I always wrote as a kid. And I found these little journals that I kept and these little stories that I wrote. And I just used to get a big kick out of that. Well, is there any, is it a mystery that I love doing that now? No, but I can tell you that if I've gotten away from doing that, one of the things that would reconnect me to it is if somebody said to me, tell me about the things that you used to love doing when you were a kid. So I think if people start asking, one, you asked for, what are the things that people can do? One
Yeah.
is to ask that question. When you were a child, when were you happiest? What were you doing? Who was there? What did it involve? Because the seeds of that are the thing that's still, you're still the same human being. You were this, it was just a smaller body. In my case, it was a lot smaller body. But that's one aspect of it. And the other is the question that I mentioned earlier. Are there any hobbies that you used to really love to do as an adult, but that you stopped doing? Because I find people often, it's all there in our history already. It's unlikely that somebody says, I just discovered at 50 years old that I'm passionate about flower arranging. I just never knew I was going to love that. That's probably a happy accident. And
Yeah.
people discover new things that they enjoy
They
doing. They learn
do.
how to cook later in life.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. If they're not there, though, if they haven't discovered that thing, it's really interesting to look back. What did I love doing when I was a little kid? What just brought me absolute joy that I used to love to do? I don't care if it's playing, the recorder, that little instrument, or the harmonica, or what it was. What are those things? And the second one is there a hobby or pastime that you used to enjoy that you've stopped doing, and what was that?
I think that's great advice. And what's really funny, somebody asked me that, might have been you, but somebody recently asked me as well, what was it that I really, really liked doing as a kid?
Right.
And I used to love almost like sound editing. I used to love taking cassette tapes from different
Right.
music. And I was about 10, so this is going back a long time ago. So, and I used to take these different cassette tapes and I'd unscrew them all, pull them all apart, and I'd cut the tape
Right.
out, and then I'd join them all back together, and I would create my own compilation.
Something new. Yep.
Yeah, I would create something new out of it. And then I also remember getting my first tape recorder when I was about 10. Remember when you were kids and you'd be trying to record the radio and you'd say to everyone in the room, shut up, everyone be quiet. And you'd press record
Right.
so you could record the song on the radio, and the announcer would always cut in at the end of the song and stuff it up for you. So you always
And
lost
ruin it.
just the
Yes.
end. But I used to really enjoy conversation. So I think I may have mentioned this on, I don't know if I mentioned it on my other podcast or on this one, but I'd ask my parents something. Dad, can I do this? And he'd go, oh, no, I have to talk to your mother. I go, okay. Now, prior to asking that question, I'd already put my tape recorder there and I'd already pressed record, and I'd walk away. And then my parents would discuss what I needed to do as a child. If he did this, this, and this, we would let him do that.
Right.
So I would come back in, and when they were gone, I'd then take the tape player and I'd listen back
Oh my God.
to
Wow.
what my parents said. And I'm going, oh, okay, clean my room, mow the lawn, do all this sort of stuff, look after things.
Right.
So I'd then go, I'd do all that, and my parents would go, oh, you know how you asked about this? Yeah. Yes, you can have that. And I go, oh, that's awesome. So I was a
That's
perfect
awesome.
child.
Yep.
What I realized I liked doing, I loved sound. I liked audio. I liked messing around with tapes and pulling things apart. And that's what I'm doing now.
It's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. And by the way, just parenthetically, there is a wonderful short story written years ago called Merck's Collected Silences that I think you would really enjoy, and listeners as well. I believe the author was Heinrich Boll, Boll, and it's about a sound engineer who used to take the pauses in between famous people speaking that he was recording, and he put them all together in one long tape of just the pauses and the silences in between people speaking. Really interesting short story. But you've really nailed this idea of finding the passion that was either lost or that we don't remember or
Yeah.
that we have gotten away from. And I don't. There's an old saying. It's sort of gender specific, but I don't think that matters. The saying is, "The child is father to the man," and I really believe that when we think back to childhood, to the things that made us happy and joyful, and really that we were just naturally curious and excited about. You find so much rich information there that's at anyone's disposal. They don't have to buy a book. They don't have to go to a motivational speaker to see it. It's all there in our own memory to reflect on. Just one last thing that's sort of interesting to do is, and I've done this myself, and I think this is a recommendation from our colleague David Fries, is to ask other people what they think we're passionate about. Because oftentimes that extra feedback can go, whoa, I didn't realize that that's, I really love making people laugh, but I wouldn't have said that's my passion.
Yeah.
But when I've asked people, what do you feel I am passionate about? What have you heard me talk most passionately about? They often say, you're passionate about helping people, you love making people laugh, and you love the beach. Like, those are all true.
That's good advice. So, Dave, I want to thank you for coming on the Podiatry Legends podcast, sharing some of your wisdom. I'd love to get you back at some stage because there's so many. I remember when I had you on It's No Secret with Dr. T, and we spoke about the psychology behind people's commitment. When people don't turn up for appointments. And we were talking about something a bit broader back then. But there's so many other topics that I think would be really, really interesting. And if people want to find out more about Dave, easy to find on Facebook, David Weiman. Also, wymanconsulting.com. And I'm going to put all this in the show notes. And also make sure on Facebook you find Weiman Consulting as well, because Dave has these little videos called Rise and Wine, which I will keep sharing on the Podiatry Legends
page.
Much.
That's awesome.
Because they are pretty awesome. But if you don't, I know not everything that you see, not everything that is posted you see. So therefore, I think you need to go out of your way and go and watch these short little videos. That will change your life. So, Dr. Dave,
thank you.
Thank you for coming on the Podiatry Legends podcast.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Dave Weiman today. And I'd really love your feedback on what you thought about dragging some of these older episodes out of the archives that may have been missed by some of the more recent listeners of this podcast. And as always, if you're enjoying this podcast, please tell your podiatry friends, unless you don't have any. But also, if you're really loving this podcast, please consider leaving a rating and review on whatever your favorite podcast platform is. Okay, that's it for me this week. I want you to look after yourself, look after your family, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now.